Hello and welcome to the Here and Now, where we provide structured summaries of current affairs and happenings. In this video, I'll be talking about the UAW strike against the big three automakers, GM, Ford, and Stellantis. We will go through who the players are, a timeline of key events, detail on the broader context of the strike, where the negotiations are currently at, and look forward to what might happen in the near future. Let's start with the UAW, or the United Auto Workers Union. It's one of the largest labor unions in America, with over 400,000 active members and 580,000 retired members. It has around 1,750 contracts with about 1,050 employers. However, most of its members, about 150,000 of them, work at the big three automakers. UAW members make monthly contributions, about 2 to 2.5 hours of pay, to the union, and in return receive various benefits, the biggest of which come from the collective bargaining agreements the UAW negotiates with employers such as the Big Three. At the beginning of the strike, the UAW had $825 million, which it uses to pay members $500 a week while they are on strike. Shawn Fain is the president of the UAW, and he earns around $207,000 per year. On the other side, we have the Big Three. They are the largest automakers in America and together produce 40% of all the cars sold in the United States. You can probably recognize the various auto brands sold by them. Their respective CEOs are Mary Barra for GM, Jim Farley for Ford, and Carlos Tavares for Stellantis. We'll touch on their pay a bit later in this video. The Big Three have large manufacturing footprints in the United States, including assembly plants, engine plants, and stamping plants. Most of their hourly employees working in these facilities are also UAW members, with Ford having the largest UAW membership. What's actually happened so far? The previous UAW agreements with the Big Three expired on September 14th, and so negotiations for new agreements started about 2 months before, in mid-July. It's interesting to note that while the parties had 2 months for negotiations before the September 14th expiry date, the Big Three only provided their first counter-proposals to the UAW about 2 weeks before the expiry date. In fact, on September 2nd, the UAW filed unfair labor practice charges against both Stellantis and GM for not providing a counter-proposal yet at that time. There were multiple rounds of proposals up to the September 14th expiry, but unfortunately the parties could not reach an agreement. As a result, the next day, the UAW called a strike at 3 Ford, Stellantis, and GM plants. The following week, on September 22nd, the UAW expanded the strike at GM and Stellantis, with another 5,600 UAW workers joining the strike. Ford was spared because the UAW felt they had made significant progress in their negotiations with them. However, the following week, on September 29th, the UAW expanded the strike again for both Ford and GM, with another 7,000 of their UAW members going on strike. On October 3rd, the UAW announced it was going to expand the strike at GM, but decided not to because at the last minute GM agreed to place its electric battery manufacturing work under the UAW agreement. And recently, on October 11th, the UAW expanded the strike at Ford with another 8,700 members joining the strike. In total, there are currently over 33,000 UAW members on strike across the Big Three. To understand some of the context behind the UAW strike, we need to go back to the Great Recession. By 2008, the Big Three, along with a lot of other businesses, were in dire straits financially. They requested federal government assistance. Before providing financial assistance, the federal government required concessions from the Big Three's management teams, bondholders, and employees. As UAW President Shawn Fain recently described it, the deal was UAW members take some short-term cuts for the long-term survival of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. The key concessions made by UAW on behalf of its members were the introduction of a tiered wage system such that new hires were on a different pay scale, the removal of cost of living adjustments that protected against inflation, reduced retiree healthcare benefits, and removal of job security provisions. As a result of all these concessions, the federal government ended up providing $80 billion to GM and Chrysler, which eventually became Stellantis. To note, the government did end up recovering most of the funds it provided. A second contextual point is around the Big Three profits and CEO pay. The UAW has claimed that over the last 4 years, auto worker wages are up only 6% compared to 65% in Big Three profits and 40% in Big Three CEO pay. On this page, I've summarized the net income attributable to stockholders for each of the Big Three. As you can see, the profits of both GM and Stellantis have definitely been growing in the last 4 years. However, Ford's profits have been all over the place. For 2022, Ford management attributed a large portion of its net loss to its failed investments in driverless tech company Argo AI and electric vehicle company Rivian. On CEO pay, I've summarized the pay received by each of the Big Three CEOs over the last 4 years. In 2022, each of the Big Three CEOs were paid more than they were in 2019. It should be noted that while Mary Barra has been CEO of GM throughout the 4-year period, both Jim Farley and Carlos Tavares have only been in their CEO roles for about 2 years in the period shown. The third matter to know for broader context is the transition to EVs or electric vehicles. The whole industry is transitioning from internal combustion engines to EVs, and this is supported by government policy, including a federal tax credit for consumers who buy EVs assembled in the United States. Each of the Big Three have noted they are planning to grow their sales of EVs substantially and are investing significant amounts of money in order to be able to manufacture those levels of sales. The Big Three claim that the significant investments required to transition to EVs will be hampered by the UAW's demands. They imply that the UAW's demands will increase the cost of making EVs and will mean that they will not be able to compete competitively with other automakers. On the current status of negotiations, the UAW has made a number of key demands. The UAW has announced it has made progress with the Big Three on a number of these demands, including eliminating wage tiers and halving the number of years for workers to get to the top wage rate, wage increases of 20 to 23% over the 4-year contract term and higher temp wages, restored cost of living adjustments with Ford and Stellantis, and getting GM to agree to place electric battery manufacturing under its UAW agreement. However, there are still gaps between what the UAW is demanding and what the Big Three have proposed, such as defined benefit pensions as opposed to the increased 401k contributions proposed by the Big Three, retiree medical benefits, and bringing battery plants under the UAW agreements, which only GM has agreed to. Looking forward, it has been almost a month since the UAW strike started. There has been significant pressure on the Big Three, both publicly and financially, to come to an agreement with the UAW. President Biden joined a UAW picket line on September 26. Also, it has been estimated that the first 3 weeks of the strike cost the Big Three $2.68 billion. Perhaps as a result of this financial pressure, the Big Three have announced a large number of layoffs since the strike started. On the UAW side, the striking members are only receiving $500 per week from the strike fund, so they are also suffering financially. As previously mentioned, the UAW had a large $825 million strike fund, which it uses to support its striking members. With over 33,000 members currently on strike, this means the fund will be spending over $16.5 million per week. It will likely be more, as there are also about 4,000 UAW workers who recently went on strike at Mack Trucks, separate to those on strike at the Big Three. Hopefully, the UAW and the Big Three come to an agreement soon. In Canada, the Big Three are going through similar negotiations with the union Unifor there. They have been able to reach agreements with Ford and GM already. This is obviously a positive and hopefully signals that the similar negotiations the UAW are holding with the Big Three are also close to reaching an agreement.